very strict, plus they can segment the network so that if there is harm, and we have to assume the bad guys will get in because you can't eliminate all risk, you segment the network so that when something bad happens, you limit the cascading effects. You can control the impacts. So the fact is that where something comes from is a whole lot less important than you take the attitude than we take when a foreign company buys an American company. The U.S. government requires risk mitigation plan overseen by a committee of government agencies to guarantee that there isn't improper undue influence. We believe that's the way to go.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is the core of the 5G networks. That's part of the network where whoever, whether it's a cable company or a cell phone company, they can see almost all the traffic that runs across that network. One thing that's interesting about Huawei is you make pretty much every product that's out there. Is the core of 5G networks not a market that Huawei wants to play in?
Well, we'd like to play in all markets. But from a risk mitigation standpoint, from limiting the risk, we've made the choice. And so, for example, the UK government, there was recently an announcement that was made to look like something really bad, that we were not going to be in the core of, for example, the British telecom network. But that was agreed to, that was planned, that was the way it is. But frankly, the distinction between core and non-core, as the standards develop and as we move toward the full rollout of 5G, with the full rollout of 5G, there will be these viral slices in cyberspace that have particularly strong authentication requirements. So it's much less important, the issue of core versus non-core, than it is effective and transparent risk mitigation measures. And we'd love to discuss those.
Let me ask you about in the last quarterly report from Huawei. The company said it's shipped a great deal of base stations, 5G base stations, using this new technology, and is doing business with a number of different providers. What's the status of that? Where are these base stations being shipped? Who are the first companies to use this 5G equipment?
Well, I'm not sure that I can reconstruct the business elements of 30 or 40,000 base stations that we've sold. I'm not really on the business side. It's some of the most widely publicized early adopters for 5G, and I think there's been tremendous amount, all the contracts are public, but I don't off the tip of my tongue have the specifics of that. But it is interesting that the first quarter this year, our revenues were up 39%. And you look at last year, 2018, you look at the cycle for carrier networks. And we were in a trough last year as we start to move up toward the deployment of 5G. So we're expecting good things in the future.
Are we in danger of having two separate 5G networks, one sponsored by China, one based in the U.S.?
No, I don't think so. And it's interesting that I expect that the U.S. will do what the UK is doing, which hasn't gotten as much publicity. I expect that to help manage risk and to promote resiliency, which is fundamental. We've got to make sure our networks are up and running. They're going to be much more important when we fully deploy 5G. The last 15 years, cybersecurity, people have talked about it, but they haven't really cared about it that much because most people don't really care that much about data breaches. But we're going to be dependent in a serious way on the digitized vertical industries sectors, the government services. And what the U.S. will undoubtedly do, what the private companies will do, is they'll have diversity of suppliers. So hopefully we'll get to be one of multiple suppliers for key nodes, such as radio access. That helps promote resiliency and helps reduce risk.
One of the fears, I think, and this is not a new fear because Huawei has been talked about in this country for years as a potential threat. We saw in Sri Lanka, the internet was essentially shut down on that island. We saw it in Egypt years ago during the spring. Is there a potential that Huawei could shut down people who have Huawei products?
Take a look at the news stories in the last 6 months, last 12 months, of major outages that have occurred around the world with our competitors and providers. The issue of availability of these services, trying to promote greater resiliency, trying to promote clearer standards and accountability for the major carriers to make sure they can meet the needs of our governments, of our companies, of our people, that's critically important. The fact is we don't have access like the carriers do to the ability to shut down. It's a theoretical issue. We don't continue to control the products after they're in the networks. But from a national security perspective, from the perspective of the well-being of the United States, we have to make sure that the carriers are on board. We have to make sure that protections relative to risks from the vendors, from the equipment vendors, that's that's what's going to help us make sure that we can maintain the services that we're going to depend on even more than we do today.
I want to ask more about interoperability because ultimately in many countries most companies are not going to rely on one single supplier for all their equipment. Huawei's involved in a lot of the development of the technical specifications for 5G that everybody's going to use. And there have been some complaints among carriers that those technical standards can be favorable to Huawei, can make it actually harder for a company that wants to use a European or other East Asian provider to switch from Huawei. Is there going to be the ability of a company that wants to switch providers away from Huawei? Are they going to have the ability to do that?
One of the most important operating premises of the development of the really impressive 5G standards that have been coming up with is that interoperability is, I was going to say at the core, but interoperability is critical across the board. So no, the operators have to hold the vendors accountable to meet the standards that are going to require interoperability as well as requiring quality and security requirements. So that's not going to be an issue. Frankly, I'd like to see the United States put a little more money into getting participation in more of the international activities. The government funds have been cut down, so they're not involved in activities as much. So private companies are involved in the standards efforts. I'd love to see the U.S. have greater visibility into, what are the standards, what's going to be developed, what are the most important threats that are going to be addressed by the standards. Because when you look at 5G, there are significant security enhancements that are being added to make us all safer. And the U.S. weighing in, our allies weighing in to the standards process, I think would be a great thing.
Let me ask you about the ongoing civil and criminal cases that are happening against Huawei in the U.S. Your CFO, Wan Zhou, was arrested in Canada earlier this year. Is she going to appear before a U.S. judge? And if so, what do you expect out of that?
Well, I think there's an appearance tomorrow.
In the U.S.?
No,
Or
Canada.
Canada, in Vancouver?
As a former federal prosecutor, I have an inkling of how much federal judges dislike people involved in cases, talking about those cases. So I'll respectfully defer to others talking about the situations with those two cases.
Do you think then, on a hypothetical level, that this was a political move or a trade positioning move?
There is a context for everything. I am a believer in the criminal justice system of the United States and Canada. I have confidence that the proceedings will be based on facts and based on the law, and that whatever the correct determination is based on the facts of law is what will take place. I do know the process in Canada can be fairly time-consuming, so it may take longer than everyone would like.
Was Huawei invited to that event in Prague? Did you have any representatives there?
Well, I know my boss was there, John Suffolk, was in Prague for the conference. There was part of the conference that was open, and then I believe there were breakout sessions one afternoon and one morning that have generated the remarks from the chairman of the proceedings about the requirements that many, including the U.S. government, are encouraging the various countries involved in the EU in general to try to incorporate those into their requirements for who to purchase and how to monitor the kind of work that they do.
Let me ask you, especially in Europe, U.S. officials, both at this event in Prague and earlier in the year, have gone to many countries, visited their counterparts, and essentially told them not to buy equipment from Huawei. Has that had any effect on the company's business around the world?
I don't think so. And in fact, I've heard some comments by some of the officials of my company saying that the publicity has been a good thing. I'm not going to go there. Our allies, for most of them, want to talk about true risk mitigation measures that provide assurance and transparency, and that's what we'd like to do.
Andy Purdy, given your cybersecurity background, your DHS background, what do you think, on a general level, are some of the cybersecurity threats here in the U.S.?
Well, I think they're pretty much everywhere. I think one of the biggest problems is a lack of commitment and leadership around cybersecurity. I think in the last year, 18 months, we've seen some great efforts by the Department of Homeland Security, by NIST, but the leadership to make sure that we provide the funding that's necessary to fund the efforts against the election tampering, to help come up with requirements for 5G. to help create greater visibility as to what the leaders of American companies, particularly publicly traded companies, what their due diligence and fiduciary care responsibilities are. There are fundamental things that can be done. We've got to get more action. We need goals, objectives, goals, and milestones to track progress and know when there's success. We need strict oversight by Congress. And we've got a long way to go to improve in those areas.
I think one thing we have not said is that Huawei is now the second largest manufacturer of smartphones in the world behind Samsung.
And I would say that the U.S. government in early 2018 apparently put pressure on AT&T and Verizon not to carry our phone because of security concerns. All I would ask is, if there are security concerns about our phones that operate on the Android platform, it's time to raise the security requirements for all Android phones to make us safer. Let's focus on the issues and let's make us all safer.
Andy Purdy is Chief Security Officer for Huawei Technologies USA, and Drew Fitzgerald covers telecom and technology for the Wall Street Journal. Gentlemen, thank you. Also want to note that
So if I talk sense to the whole thing, it's not substance. A lot of things they should actually, the operator should actually take measure to prevent any kind of hacking and so on. Now I think just now I will just mention that the mistrust. Part of it is actually the 5G speed and so on, which is different from 4G. On the other hand, I think Huawei also lacking certain kind of things. Although they have employed a lot of Angmo and a lot of foreigners, and this guy is actually heading the US Huawei office on security. And there are many others. I think he referred to his boss. His boss also working in Huawei, of course. It's also another. But what I actually see is, in the whole process of the whole process, I think if Huawei want to be successful in the international business circle, they must actually, at the same time, have better public relations. And you must also get collaborations with other people. It's good to be the Chinese way of doing things is 一条龙 from head to tail 报告掉. But the problem is, if you do this kind of thing, your user, the customer, will actually have a lot of fear. What is actually inside the bottom. So thing like this is, if they were to actually involve Cisco and others, HP or whoever it is, US company, to actually participate into the preparation of the rollout and so on, I think it will be easier. And why I'm actually talking about this is actually, if you actually look into China, China is actually developing a so-called passengers aircraft. The 919 is actually having the few test flight already, and the new one will be exactly that. The roll-up version will be a modified one, which will be even bigger, which will be the 929. Now, before a plane can be actually allowed to fly, he had to go into I think it's FAA or something, a US organization who is supposed to be governing all the safety specifications for the aircraft. They have to go through all those test flights and so on, and then you have to certify that before you are given the license or given the permission to actually land somewhere. Unless China wants to fly this plane from Beijing to Xizang and from Xizang to Chongqing, and then that's it for internal flight. Maybe US cannot control. But the moment they want to fly outside of China and fly to Singapore, you are not allowed to fly. So that is a thing, And I think I think a few months ago, I think Xi Jinping actually went to Europe, talking to, I think visited France and then also the Germans party and so on. And they actually signed on the spot, I think another 300 Airbus from France, because they cancel all the Boeing because of this trade war. Cancel all the order of the Boeing. And at the same time, Xi Jinping actually invited them to actually come and participate in the building of our new aircraft, 929, which is due for test flight soon. You need this kind of thing, you know. You get people in, and then you get your French friend to go and talk to FAA to get the license. If you do everything yourself, you know, so that is why I look into the whole thing is actually, of course, you cannot look back saying that, you know, 4G has no problem, why 5G? It must be political. The situation is different, the nature of the feature is different. Yeah. And also the same thing is actually, last time nobody worried about it, 4G, as I say, 报告料. Now 5G, these people, HP are not enrolled, IBM are not enrolled. 11 of them, you know, when I check onto the list, you know. Okay, so I still short of running out of the answer your question. I don't show the thing. Now if you look into the 3 telcos in Singapore, M1 was actually with a Hong Kong partnership starting. But nowadays, I think, if I remember correctly, is the NTT, the Japanese is actually one of the shareholders mentioned. But Temasek is still the overall holder. Then StarHub, it was actually started off with Vodafone. Vodafone is a UK company. But since then also, they have sold off already. And then Temasek is, I think, okay. M1 actually is Keppel. Keppel and SPH is the major plus the Temasek. Then StarHub is actually Temasek and NTT, who actually bought all the share from Vodafone, the UK company. Yeah. So traditionally, they use a lot of things actually from Vodafone also. You know, last time they show a lot of accessory also Vodafone. And what I can say is, you know, now since 5G is actually going to UK, I think because of another stream, Vika Singh is actually running one of the company in UK. I think it's called EE Telephone. So that is why that influences the British government to actually accept Huawei also. Yeah. All these are actually a thing. Then Singtel is 100% Temasek. And traditionally they are using Ericsson's equipment. So when they are doing the testing now, they are purely Ericsson actually now depends on Nokia. So Nokia is the one that actually doing the testing in Singapore for Singtel. And for the StarHub, I'm not too sure who is doing it. Probably tap onto NTT, but NTT now rejected Huawei. So I do not know exactly who is running the thing, the latest situation. But it was actually Vodafone actually goes in the past. And then to M1 actually started directly with Huawei. But the latest situation, I do not know. Because they actually said last year, they already started actually all this testing. Each one actually have a certain area for them to test. And mainly for enterprise use. So I don't think we are going to get 5G network for consumer use by next year. I don't think so.
Basically, based on the research, Singtel working with Ericsson on 5G trial completed, StarHub working with Nokia, M1 working with Huawei, Yeah.
Correct. But startup now also, because Nokia and startup also together. Ericsson actually really no development at all.
But Ericsson and Synopsis is compared to say a trial, yeah.
Yeah.
So compared to the trial, so now it's the latest one is the M1 and the Huawei starting their trial. Yeah. So when they try successful, they will go with the common system. So far, all three different people. Yeah.
Ericsson 5G
So far in the world, there's only three companies now. The ZTE is gone. So Huawei, Nokia, Ericsson, like what you say, Ericsson, Nokia very small. Huawei is the biggest. Even you Ericsson, Nokia, they got to pay some so-called license fee to Huawei also.
The equipment will be come from China anyway.
That's why this guy said they are evaluating Huawei.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what you mean.
M1 still made that.
No, they are actually evaluating on the whole security thing. He did not say they will reject Huawei, not rejecting.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
But I don't think that actually, eventually, all the equipment will actually, but there will be a central body to actually make sure that certain measures are there. Okay, thank you very much.